All right, so Bernd Friedlander has a bachelor's degree in physical education with emphasis in applied kinesiology from San Francisco State. He's a doctor of chiropractic, and he has been involved in developing nutritional therapies since 1982. As a result of his therapeutic formulas, he pioneered the research and use of nutrition and free-form amino acids for improving athletic performance as a safe alternative to steroids. He's an experienced speaker, has lectured across the country for over 30 years on nutrition and anti-aging, and has made numerous TV and radio appearances. He's written sports and nutritional articles, and has given interviews for numerous magazines. He'll be talking tonight about diet and health and longevity. Give Bernd a hand.
Hey, Robert. All right. Well, what I'm going to cover, first of all, I want to mention something that what Dr. Campbell said about spores. One of the products I've developed 25 years ago, over 30 years ago, is called Ultra Blend. It is the only probiotic in the market that actually has Bacillus subtilis. And it's been in the market for over 30 years now, and Gabriel Cousin is one of our big users, and so is John Gray. And so if you need a product like that, because it does contain Bacillus subtilis, which is my research going back in the 80s with the Japanese, using spore types of probiotics, bacteria, for inducing benefits in the health, especially in the immune system. And ours is the only one that has lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium longum, which the Japanese has shown back in the 60s to be one of the greatest nutritional benefits, and it's necessary in all the gut formation. And so important is that if you were delivered naturally, vaginally, and you were breastfed, you were receiving all the nutritional bacteria that the body needs. And if you avoided natural vaginal delivery, you're not going to get all the natural bacteria, so you're going to be deficient in that. And also, in the first 24 hours of breast milk is when you are actually receiving all the necessary nutrients that the baby needs. It's the 24 hours, not 6 months of it, but it's basically the 24 hours. So it's very interesting, and the leaky gut is so important. I'm glad he mentioned that, because predominantly every disease we know today is predominantly caused by leaky gut syndrome. And some very interesting thing, if you go back in the 60s and 70s, there was a very brilliant dentist who stated that he can reverse all dental bacteria and cavity by using laxatives and only laxatives. Can you understand that? By just improving the gut motility and removing the endotoxins in the gut, he was able to reverse dental bacteria cavities. Now, all that information he provided was never brought out to the public, because where does the money in dentistry come from if you can reverse a condition like that? Another interesting study was done 30, 40 years ago by another physician who reversed Parkinson's disease back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s by using what? Laxatives, only laxatives. In 10 days, all the condition of the Parkinson patients that he saw were completely reversed through 10 days of using laxatives. So going back to where science back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, using natural methods of cleaning the gut out, promoted health. And diabetes is the same thing. Every disease we know of today, MS, is basically a sluggish bowel and an endotoxins called lipopolysaccharides. And lipopolysaccharides, LPS, is a major contributing to aging and disease and cancer and virtually every disease we know of. And simply by just doing the laxatives like Cascara Sagrada, or by eating carrots. Every single day, one raw carrot has the greatest medicinal properties of any food out there because it binds to endotoxins. And in Korea and China, in Japan, they use bamboo shoots. Bamboo shoots also has tremendous benefits in removing endotoxins, but they have to be cooked. And virtually every food today that we cook actually helps to remove endotoxins. Bamboo shoots, mushrooms, and mushrooms also help with autophase kind of mechanism like autophagy, which we're going to talk about. I'm also going to today talk about something very exciting, which the industry is now going into. There's some new science about cancer research and how to stop the aging of cells and repair it and stimulate new stem cells. And we'll talk about that. But as we know, everything in metabolism quality is controlled by inflammation. So we know that. Support mitochondria function. Going back 1 billion years ago, the first organism that created life was a bacteria called what? Mitochondria. And this mitochondria was developed by a simple bacteria that was at the right time of the right period of evolution in science, billions of years ago. And this bacteria required the right kind of sunlight, the right kind of temperature, and the right kind of conditions in the water. And that created life. Everything was developed by the mitochondria. An envelope around it created every single system in our body. So everything that goes on in life today is oxidation, reduction, the burning of fuel to make energy, ATP. Then you have CO2, water, and this recycling electron donation of burning fuel by using glucose. And oxidizing glucose is the key method. If you go back to 1900s, you had Gumberg, you had Koch, you had Otto Warburg, you had Sir Georgi, you had every top scientific mind in the world talking about oxidation of glucose, metabolism, the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle. Gilbert Ling, the inventor of the MRI, Raymond Domanium, all came across because of cell physiology and chemistry, and everything is based on mitochondria and chemistry and oxidation reduction. Every scientific paper now, like Guarante and Sinclair out of Harvard, they're looking at the same thing that Koch and Gumberg and everyone else, and Otto Warburg, and even Linus Pauling were looking at, was the metabolism of cells and the Krebs cycle and the energy production and the oxidation reduction factors and the high metabolic function of animals that live forever, who have a greater degree of lifespan, are animals that have a high metabolic function. Speckman wrote and published 5 papers on longevity of animals with high metabolic function. And so we're looking at what causes high metabolic function. Well, when you increase NAD levels, that's what happens. We're all born with 500 to 1 NAD plus to NADH ratios. As we start aging, as we get ill, nature takes over and the reduction of NAD levels go down where they become 200 to 1. So you're losing from 500 to 201, and then virtually every disease known to man starts. So if you can reverse that, you maintain longevity, you can prevent disease, and you can repair and stimulate stem cells to grow. All right, let's look at certain things of protein and why protein is so important, because protein was developed through many different factors, through different forms of sugar. And sugar is what you and I are here. There's a molecule called D-ribose that started the foundation 1 billion years ago. And it's interesting. Scientists today have found deep in space, where we're talking about billions of years away from Earth, they're discovering new life form. And you know what they're finding in the cell, in the universe? Sugar molecules. That is linked to life. Interesting. Many different D-ribose molecules, sugar molecules, started the whole creation of life. That's how exciting this field is becoming. And they're starting to realize that they can actually make life forms now by using these sugar molecules that make the DNA, the RNA, and proteins and amino acids. You know, I got into it in sports medicine because I was designed to achieve athletes to perform at a high level. And I had more gold medal winners in '84 and '88 than any coach out there in the world. It's because I started looking at nutrition and understanding cell chemistry and how the body works. What are the fuels that we need to improve performance and create, you know, a greater degree of function and recovery? And that's a big thing, recovery. We don't recover enough. And so we start aging. And we'll talk about a new science of aging that is going to be very exciting in the future. And it's happening today, and they're now looking at cancer research, all based on this new science of aging. And so we're looking at that. So we want to, okay, he mentioned tryptophan. Tryptophan is necessary, but we don't need a lot of it, okay? Where this come from, I was involved with Roy Walford back in the 80s. He was a patient of mine, and he was in charge of caloric restriction diet. He was the leading expert in caloric restriction diet, and he asked me to come in and work with him and see what really caloric restriction diet's all about. And I learned from him and scientific papers that I started reviewing myself that caloric restriction diet created several factors why it really works in extending lifespan, but also lowers mortality and cancer and diabetes and heart disease and MS and Parkinson's, all because it contributes to one thing: reducing mitochondrial oxidative damage. That's what caloric restriction does. You're putting less chemicals in your body. That's what we're doing. You're putting less toxins in our body. That's what you're doing by caloric restriction diet. But in animals, it works. In humans, it hasn't shown yet, because one of the problems in human studies is libido goes down in the human. So by restricting your proteins and other that, you're not going to have a great amount of libido or physical function. You will look better, you will feel better, but you're not going to perform the level you want to. So that was a drawback in caloric restriction diets. Then there was another study that came out and showed there was a factor of certain things in our diet that causes cancer, diabetes, and heart disease, and that happened when the vegetable oil industry started popping up. It wasn't to the industrial age of grains, when we started using grains in our diet, that disease started occurring. Did you know that the chemical companies started developing from plants all these medicinal properties to go against every disease we know of since the industrial age of agriculture? Before that, man died from nature, from disease, from hunger, from starvation, or from just being killed by others. It wasn't to the industrial age that grains started coming into our life, and it changed and altered our genetic factors, our gene expressions, and we turned the wrong genes on and the good genes off. And that's what happens. It wasn't until man discovered how to cook food that our gene in the brain developed. Did you know that the gene in our brain developed because of cooking food, of cooking meat? The mandible, the TMJ, all these muscles started not being used for biting and eating and grinding, but it started absorbing our food more easily, digesting it better, that the gene of our brain started developing. Why in the animal kingdom we're the only humans that cooks food that has intelligence? Think about this. Lions, animals, chimpanzees, nobody. We're the only ones. Because of cooking. And fire gave us everything. There's even studies now shown that by cooking your vegetables, you absorb 90% of the nutrients versus 20% from raw vegetables. And you're causing motility damage in the gut, inflammation by eating raw vegetables. You have leaky gut syndrome, celiac. All these diseases are popping up because of the salad bars and the raw vegetables, because I see patients coming in all the time. Since the 80s, when I was in the industry, I predominantly either work with athletes or entertainers, film stars, those who I saw, because they were into the anti-age, and there was these raw foodists, and they all had problems. So when we started cooking food, that's when we changed. And that was the predominant function that gave us creativity and the mind and the brain, and we started using intelligence. And today, the same thing is happening. If we cook our vegetables, we digest the nutrients more, and we get vitamin K out of kale. Rather, you don't get any vitamin K out of kale when it's not cooked. Okay? In other cultures, we're the only ones that eat raw vegetables. Asians, they saute it, they cook it. Every country other than the United States cooks their foods. And that's why we're getting sick. And the science, and there's a lot of research coming out of that. So one of the other things we discovered, and I started learning, when I interviewed several scientists, Fisher, Lopez, and Richard Miller, an MD, PhD, and they found that they were looking at rapamycin, mTOR as factors of aging. Everything is based on IGF-1, insulin growth factor, mTOR, which causes cancer cells to grow, things like that. But the big factor that they discovered was that caloric restriction diet also discovered was when you reduce certain amino acids, like tryptophan, methionine, you actually increase lifespan in animals. Now the science has even shown in humans the same thing. 23% of reduction of, let's see, I have it in here. When you reduce here, when you restrict tryptophan, it extends the lifespan of animals in humans by 23%. You need tryptophan, but tryptophan also is a mediator of all inflammatory markers, and it's brought on by inflammation. And tryptophan also causes many different factors. If you look at tryptophan extends lifespan by 23% by lowering mTOR, a mechanism that is now a pathway for cell growth like tumors, delays sexual maturation, and lowers IGF. These are all cited. Now, we saw that in animals when we did caloric restriction breakdowns. We saw that these animals had very low levels of tryptophan and methionine in their diets. And that's why they extended the lifespan dramatically. Now with methionine, the same thing. Life extension by 40% in animal studies. It lowers oxidative damage, mitochondria damage. Insulin reduces and promotes proper glucose levels, lowers IGF, reduces accumulation of visceral fat. This comes from PubMed. This is published papers. And this is what I learned in my studies with caloric restriction diet, was lowering this. Not only that, that's why in 1980 I was the first one to ever use collagen in sports. First time, Knox Gelatin supported me in my 84, 88 Olympics in 80, was because I was looking at proteins that were low in tryptophan, methionine, cysteine, and were anti-inflammatory proteins. And collagen, gelatinous food, is the only food out there in nature that is very low in inflammatory markers like that. What's one of the best foods you can have today? It's well known in Asian countries. They've been eating gelatinous food forever. Chicken wings, oxtail, lamb shanks, anything from the neck. They use cartilage in their soups. That is why certain cultures live longer and have greater degree of health benefits and less conditions, because we're getting away to lean meat. Lean meat is one of the greatest causes of aging today because of tryptophan, methionine, and cysteine is the highest in lean meats. So you want to reduce lean meats, go back to oxtail, lamb shanks, chicken wings. You don't want the breasts of any food. You don't want to eat breasts of chicken, thighs, or anything. And cod. Salmon is not good for you. Okay, salmon is very high in very unstable oils called EPA, DHA, which is now a contributing factor to aging. So you want to stay with cod and white and lower your types of fish that have oils, because oils by themselves are very highly unstable. And lipid chemistry from Stanford and Buck Institute has stated that you want to stay away from those kind of foods. Okay? You want to go back when everything started, when we started bringing vegetable oils back in the industry, aging started. Cancer, heart disease, everything. Every scientist I ever interviewed in lipid chemistry that taught me this says avoid polyunsaturated oils and you can extend the lifespan of every single person today. Every disease is correlated to polyunsaturated oils. Every disease. Diabetes, MS, Parkinson's. It is the #1 cause of glycation and misfolding protein. It damages DNA and RNA more than anything else. It causes arteriosclerosis. Nothing to do with cholesterol. Cholesterol is your lifesaver. It is the promoter of hormones, libido, brain function, neuron function. Everything comes from cholesterol. We got to go back to where nature was perfect and gave us butter, cream, and stay away from canola oil. They're all genetically modified. We know that good fats support mitochondria and energy. We know that. That's why Bermuda was big in fats, and so is Hyman. All these people are now looking at. We are looking at it since way back, since the caloric restriction diets, okay? So by limiting polyunsaturated oils, you increase the potential for longevity beyond anybody else. And iron, at a certain age of past 45 years old, iron becomes very corrosive. It damages our cells. It causes damage with the vitamin C and can lead to a lot of blood vessel problems and things like that. So there's a factor that iron and polyunsaturated oils contribute to cardiovascular disease. And by eliminating those things in your diet, you will reverse cardiovascular disease. And by magnesium. Magnesium has 800 critical functions in our body. It is so important in gene expression. And so is zinc and B6 and B1. We're doing all the research with Florida A&M University College of Pharmacy with Elizabeth Mazzio, identifying all the nutrients and botanicals that have epigenetic factors, anti-inflammatory, anti-mitotic, anti-proliferating factors. She's been doing this since the early 2000s, shown that. Richard Veach at NIH is now shown that fat is a contributing factor to brain function, like MCT oil, cream, butter, and olive oil are safe. Anything beyond that causes damage. So we're going into avoiding those things. You know, look at whatever happened when canola came out and all that. You still go to Whole Foods. Everything, we talked about it. Canola oil. It is one of the worst oils you can use. And that's why when I go to restaurants, I said no oil other than butter, cream, or chicken stock. Whatever you want to do, I want you to stay with chicken stock because these are contributing to fibrotic lesions of the heart, fatty acids. All of these things are big factors. So knowing that, stay away from these kind of oils are very important. Okay, now sugar is probably the greatest friend you will ever have because I should be dead today. I consume more honey than anybody here today, than anybody. I consume a lot of honey. Every night I go to bed, I have a tablespoon of honey before I go to bed. I sleep like a log. I go into a REM state of sleep. It's called the glycation factor. It's well written up. If you go into sleep and glycation in sleep, look up the data that is the scientific papers that show that you go into a deeper sleep when you go and take something that has a high glucose concentration of glycation. It lowers cortisol at night. It allows you to sleep through 4, 5, 6 hours before you get up again because it keeps cortisol down. It keeps the brain functioning. The brain needs a lot of glucose. It is highly, and so does the heart. And that's why people are fatigued today, because they avoid sugar like cane sugar, fruits. Fruits. Don't be afraid of having fruits. As a matter of fact, the ideal nutrient in the morning is protein to start the day, because protein helps with your metabolic function and stimulates your thyroid to function. And thyroid is the #1 organ that controls metabolic function and controls longevity and keeps your high metabolic rate up. And so protein is your ideal breakfast. It starts the cascade of energy for the whole body. And then you can have your coffee with cream and honey. You can have your teas with whatever you want. But always, and the best form of protein I like is over easy, poached or soft-boiled eggs, because you always want to have the egg yolk running. The secret is in the egg yolk. It has choline, phospholipids. All the lipid chemistry comes from choline and phospholipids that the brain needs and the neurons in the cells need, and the lining of the arteries and the skin and all of that. And it's very rich in cholesterol, sulfates, like we talk about all the time. You want to consume a lot of that kind of food. So you start the day with protein and a good sugar. And during the day, you can have your fruits and mangoes and natural sweeteners, you know. The worst are the ones that are artificial sugars. You don't want any of that. But you want cane sugar. All these other sugars are necessary. As a matter of fact, I put my cancer patients on a high sugar diet. And I have them now. I have pancreatic cancer patients since 1996 free of pancreatic cancer. Liver cancer since 1999. 1992, I have 4 women with colon cancer and stomach cancer still alive today. The only ones from UCSF, out of 25 people, these 4 are still functioning today. And they still contact me because they're doing the right things. So you want the good forms of sugar, and don't be afraid of it, because I should be dead by now. I consume that. Okay, we know that NAD and the Krebs cycle is so important, and when your NAD levels are low, oxygen levels are low, all the inflammatory conditions occur, and psychological stress, and activates hypoxia-inducible factor 1, which is a component to oxidative damage in the cells, which causes hypoxia. Then cancer cells have to switch their metabolism from glucose to fatty acid synthesis. Cancer cells just react differently. You know about senescence. Senescence is something you need to know about. It's the new science is coming out. Buck Institute just had a big conference on this. Cells in nature, as long as you allow time, The greatest cause of aging and cancer is what? What do you think is the greatest cause? What Campbell said about all these toxins?
Inflammation.
Huh?
Inflammation.
Time. It was just discovered by England, and a wonderful published paper came out of UK on time as the cause of aging and cancer. It's not the chemicals, because there are people that that have these chemicals all the time, and they still survive because of genes, how the genes express themselves, and they can handle it. It's just time. Eventually, we're all going to get it. And guess what time does to cells? They cause senescence. These are natural cells that we have today that time just causes them to be damaged. Yes, chemicals can do that, mycotoxins, polyunsaturated oils, all of these contribute to senescent cells. Here's what happens. The NAD plus, its function is to find a cell like senescence, which are cancer cells, and try to fix them instead of letting them alone. You want nature to take over, and the greatest longevity we can do to ourselves is let the senescent cells, these aging cells that happens in our body every single day, let them just go to their apoptosis. Let them die naturally. Why? Guess what happens? You're producing stem cells. That is the number one way our body makes stem cells, is replacing a senescent cell. And stem cells make new cells. But it only does that if it recognizes these cells are damaged and removed from the body, and that's where autophagy comes in. That's where our recycling system works. If we have a good recycling system, we're able to get rid of these damaged cells. So drug companies today are spending a fortune on drugs to inhibit senescent cells, to stop their growth and kill them. That's what they're doing right now. The biggest money is going into that research right now, is how to stop that. We can do that naturally, by taking certain compounds, which I've been involved in looking at, like quercetin. Quercetin is one of the best natural compounds that does that innate for us. And so does tocotrienols. Tocotrienols are now showing up to have that ability to keep our cells from dying and repairing them or causing apoptosis in cancer cells. So quercetin, tocotrienols are very exciting in the area. I've been telling people to take that forever because it does help us to prolong our longevity. So, and what happens is our energy from the NAD, we should have it to make new cells, like stem cells. Our immune system is dependent on NAD levels, on mitochondrial function. Everything in a cell requires mitochondrial function, NAD plus. Oxidation reduction. Cancer cells are all in a reduced state. They don't know how to get back to an oxidative state. Interesting. Look at the signs that Otto Warburg said, and Gumberg, and then the fellow that talked about who invented the DNA strand. Do you know who he is? Watson. What did he say on Charlie Rose? He says, we're not looking at the glucose factor of normal cell metabolism. We're going in the wrong direction to treat cancer. We need to know how to remove lactic acid from the cells, okay? And lactic acid is a byproduct of abnormal cell function because it utilizes fatty acids, which takes our protein, our body protein, breaks it down and utilizes it for energy. So we don't die from the cancer cell. We die from kidney failure, heart failure, because our body cannot replicate anymore and has no energy and has no protein left because the cancer cell is immortal. They have incredible telomeres. They're immortal. They're called senescent cells that don't know how to stop, dying. They just don't know how to replicate. They know how to replicate, but no function. So we want to get rid of those senescent cells, and that's how we get a new cell all the time. So we want to increase that. So we want to increase the oxidation of glucose, which is the key factor to everything that goes on in cell physiology. Okay, so, we go back to the beginning of time and mitochondria and all that because this is where everything is today. We know that if we can increase our mitochondria levels dramatically. Now, everybody knows about nicotinic deoxyribose by Chromadex. They're spending a fortune on making a complex that increases your NAD. So Quarante and Sinclair are coming out with a product using NR, which is Chromadex. But you can get it from B3, by niacinamide. Niacinamide does the same thing. It helps to increase NAD levels. So if you take 1,000 milligrams of niacinamide a day, or 250 3 times a day, 500 3 times a day, you're getting the same results. You're increasing your NAD levels, you are burning more oxygen, fuel, and energy, and you're repairing a new cell all the time. The mitochondria, which is everything, is based on this one little organelle that started life. Okay? And this goes back to mitochondrial dysfunction and all that. So, also B1 is very important. B6, biotin. It gets rid of lactic acid in our cells and raises CO2. And one of the things about CO2, carbon dioxide, it's a molecule of life. Without it, you and I wouldn't be here. You know that high altitude has what? Low oxygen, high CO2. Immortality, less deaths, less cancers are found in high altitude climates. It's well published. Athletes that train and perform go to high altitude to train so they get more endurance and better results. People with cancer, if you go up to high altitude, you will survive and you will be able to get rid of cancer in high altitude because of the CO2 levels are dramatically. So you want to increase CO2 in your concentration. And how do you do that? Breathing. How many of you know how to do a CO2 breathing? Okay, everybody, take a deep breath 4 seconds in and hold it for 4 seconds and then explode it out like this. 4 seconds, okay, ready? In, through the nostril, hold for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let it out. And do that every day. Or breathing in a bag. How many ever done that? It really works. We have athletes do that before they perform to lower stress levels and all that. Let's see what else. So NAD, anything. Here's some niacinamide, NR, breast milk, colostrum, B complex, collagen, restricting tryptophan, methionine, and cysteine. These are all the factors why collagen always works the best because of its less inflammatory mechanisms. It's the only one that actually builds tendons, ligaments, muscles, bone density, cartilage. It actually builds a new cartilage. I've done experiments with people using 40 to 100 grams of collagen a day, completely new cartilage in their knees and new hips and new spinal cord. It's the only known nutrient that does that has the greatest degree. Vitamin D, vitamin K. Coming out with a new collagen with vitamin D, vitamin K, calcium, magnesium, zinc, B6, and niacinamide will promote even faster repair, regeneration. So we're working on that one right now. So we'll have some questions and answers. So if anybody, any other questions before I finish up here? So one of the most important things is, start the day with good source of protein, very important. Don't be afraid of consuming natural fruits and sugars and things like that, especially at night. If you feel like you don't get a good night's sleep, try a little
Bernd,
teaspoon of...
We've got to
Yeah.
start winding down here.
All right.
But you can certainly hold court while we're cleaning up and answer questions.
I'm leaving. Yeah. I'll hold court.
We'll take one question. I don't know who was
Anybody
first
have any
here.
question? It better be a good one. Otherwise, we throw you out.
I'm trying to understand if it's better to supplement with nicotinamide riboside, which is supposed to be converted by the mitochondria into NAD,
Yeah.
or to supplement with NADH.
I wouldn't do NADH.
Would not.
No, I would not do that. I would definitely stay with NR, which is nicotinic ribose from chromadex, or niacinamide. Niacinamide does very well for that.
What was the dosage of the niacinamide? You said it.
I do 1,000 in the morning myself, and then 500 in the afternoon or evening. Yeah, I do, extensive. We found that about 250 to 500 milligrams 3 times a day seems to be shown to raise NAD plus levels. So I do that. And quercetin also is very interesting because it's a molecule that helps with senescence by causing apoptosis, and therefore you get new stem cells, but it also is part of the Krebs cycle. It does help with mitochondrial function too. And there's a lot of research coming out that Edison Pharmaceutical came out with a published paper, and they have a complex of tocotrienols with CoQ10 in mitochondrial diseases. So it seems to be raising NAD levels as well in the mitochondria. So they're all looking at mitochondrial diseases now in everything out there with.
Okay, let's give Bernd a hand.
Thank you.
So, thank you all for coming.